topics, and we've never had problems talking. So I don't think you're
Okay.
gonna, yeah,
Yeah, we'll just play it by ear and go from there. I don't think it'll be an issue.
yeah. Okay. Well,
Cool.
so on that note, welcome to the podcast. We are now going live.
Awesome. Thank you, man. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much. So maybe to start this off, I just want to say that you were, I suppose, my sergeant, right, in the Marine Corps. That's how I have you saved in my phone still. I typed in your name in my phone. I was like, Steven. I was like, what the fuck is this? I was like, where is he? And then I was like, oh, it's under Sergeant Day. That's what I have you
Ah,
as, yeah. And I don't know if you remember this, but you probably do. You have a relatively good memory from what I recall, but you were the first person that I met for my unit, right? You came and to the battalion and got me.
I do recall that. I remember picking you up on the first day. Now I was
Yeah,
like, oh, this guy, I was expecting like a super young kid and you
yeah,
weren't,
yeah,
and I was like, sweet. All right. This isn't a baby, like maybe this guy has some sense to him.
yeah. Well, I hopefully lived to the expectation. Although we didn't get to work extensively together, and particularly we didn't get to do actual like shop stuff together because you were on your way out.
Yes. Yeah. I was getting out at that time. And that was yeah, that was a rough period in my life. So I'm happy I was able to at least work with you a little bit while everything was going on.
Yeah, no, I had a really, really positive, like when that happened, a lot of my other buddies, as you know, from the schoolhouse, they were also being picked up, but they were like being, hazed, or people are just being assholes or being cold, as they do, for young blood. But then you were just like so nice and positive and really calm. It's not like you were nice and kind of silly or like stupid or whatever. You were competent. You were like assertive, but just super nice, super welcoming. And I was like, man, this is weird. I was like texting my buddies. I was like, I'm having a great day today. And everybody else was like, fuck, I'm doing this and doing that. And I was like, I kind of felt like I landed in some weird pocket inside the Marine Corps, or like everything's gonna be okay. I was expecting the opposite, right? I was expecting to go guns blazing, maybe do some crazy shit. I don't know what I was expecting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess could you tell me, uh, like how what before that, like, before we get, I really want to get into all the details, but I want to know how you're doing. Like, what are you up to? What have you been,
I'm
slinging out there?
doing good, man. Senior in college, so almost done, but I just got a little bit. I got some hard work left to do, but I'll be done this year. So that's pretty
What are you
exciting.
majoring in?
Industrial engineering.
Wow.
So thank you. And it is a struggle every day, but I've worked my butt off, and it's definitely paying off. I got an offer to be a full-time engineer last year as an intern, and they offered to bring me on before I'd even finished. They were like, "Hey, we'll give you a full-time job." And then was working there for a while, left there recently, and am back on the job market. And there's a lot of positions open. I mean, just this week alone, I've had two job interviews. Next week, I have another two job interviews scheduled. And there's also people like recruiters online trying to hit you up. And the engineering field as a whole is growing massively. And they're constantly looking for engineers to work as analysts, do other things besides just engineering. I think most things with STEM degrees, they just want to, they can see that you're competent and you can handle complex mathematic problems.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of analyst jobs. There's like banks that are looking for engineers because they want you to do data analytics. So like I had a job interview this last week that was with a like an investment bank. And they were like, "Oh yeah, can you handle this? What's your experience with Excel and MATLAB and other kinds of modeling or simulation programs?" So it's been pretty cool, and it's been enlightening to see that, hey, I've put in 5 years of really hard work to go to college. It sucked for a lot of it, but oh wow, now actually things are like looking up, and maybe my hard work will pay off. I mean, maybe not. I might be homeless in 6 months, but I doubt it. Like it's things are looking up.
Right. I highly doubt that too,
Well,
particularly
thank you.
with a person with your kind of drive. What can you explain? What is an industrial engineer? What do they do?
So industrial engineers work almost exclusively in factories and in large logistics type settings. And the industrial engineering is probably the softest of the like hardcore engineering fields. You're not designing individual parts. You're not doing load calculations or power calculations. You're not designing, layouts of anything. What you're doing is you're looking at a lot of data and data for everything from your cooling times on O-rings to your logistics transportation. A lot of your Amazon and the guys who design routes for Amazon workers or layouts of Amazon warehouses, those guys are industrial engineers. And you just look at pages and pages of data, and then you filter through that data, try and remove everything that's not necessary. And then once you've pared that all down, look at it. Okay, here's where we can improve our processes by 5%. Here's something that's a bottleneck for us. Well, how would we eliminate that bottleneck? And sometimes you're designing new methods and methodology to run everything from conveyors and air belts. Sometimes you're just changing the, preventive maintenance schedules on ovens because you need ovens to heat up this part and then you need to have a separate cooling rack. So, okay, how can we alter these cooling rack? So, industrial engineers are really, really broad. And the best thing I can say is we just do a lot of data analytics.
Okay, so from the companies that you've interviewed with, are you like
Yeah.
integrated in, you know, I don't even know the term industrial engineering their processes, or is there more like a, hey, we hire a bunch of industrial engineers and we work with a bunch of businesses and we send you off to job sites?
So a lot of it is you're working at a company. There's very little contracting, although there is some. Most of it is you are working for a large, sometimes publicly traded, sometimes just very large private company, and you work on a process. So the last company I worked for was a bottle making facility, and I was specifically working on airveyors and conveyor belts for their blow molding processes. So I was
Mm,
literally just looking, okay, we're producing 24,000 bottles an hour. From these 24,000 bottles, we're only able to cleanly get 22,500. Well, why are we missing $1,500, 1,500 bottles an hour?
hmm.
So those bottles may cost us 4 cents, but why are we 1,500? Okay, how are we missing this? So that's what a lot of it is. So this week, let's see, I interviewed with another bottle making facility, and they haven't extended an offer, but they told me they were interested in me. So like that one was looking very positive. And then I had one with a bank earlier this week, looking at their data analytics and asset management. And then coming up next week, I have one for a car company and doing like large scale vehicle production systems. Working with Teamsters or no, sorry, not the Teamsters, but the auto union workers. And hey, you want to optimize how quickly you can put on a front fender. If you can put on 130 front fenders an hour, well, how can we change it? How can we adjust these processes to make it not only easier for our workers, but maybe make that 135 front fenders an hour? Because if we can remove it at any stop gaps in our production process, that is, money literally for our corporate headquarters, for our shareholders. That is like la creme de la creme. And there's a joke in the Industrial Engineering Society that industrial engineers are the worst polluters in the world because you have to convince them not to dump nuclear waste in the ocean to save 2 seconds for the process, and you're like, well, you can't, but it's efficient to dump things in the ocean. So that's why people do it because it's easy and it's efficient.
That okay, so I feel like you could literally measure how much you're worth at the company. Like, what a direct correlation between you coming in, doing a process, and saying, "Hey, this is how much money we're going to save on this. This is how much we're losing here." So it's like your output is like very, you know what I mean? It's not like vague. Like if you're like a program manager and you're running a few different things, it's like, oh, what does this guy do? But you're like, this is what I do. This is what I offer. This is what,
It,
yeah.
it's really nice because it's very tangible.
Uh huh.
I keep a work journal with me everywhere I work, and it's super simple. I can be like, oh, on this date, I did this and this, and then I save every document I've ever worked on. Even if I trash them and I don't need them later on, they still go into a separate file. Okay, I save this over here, and then I can go back through and one of the big things we do in the engineering world is like a bill of materials. So when you're building anything, you've got a bill of materials that, okay, this building that we had to build up, right? It needed concrete for the foundation, it needed nails, it needed wood for the, this, it needed this kind of scaffolding. And you have a like a line by line price item for all of that. Well, as an industrial engineer, like that's my bread and butter.
Yeah.
I look at all kinds of bills of material and, oh, well, hey, we put it up with these nails and we ordered these nails from Home Depot for 50 cents a pound. But maybe we could have ordered these nails from Ace and they would have been 40 cents a pound, or from Lowe's and they would have been 43 cents a pound. So you need, when you need 100,000 pounds of nails, saving 10 cents a pound is massive,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So it's great because you can show all of this to any employer. You can show this to your boss. You can be like, hey, here's how I saved you money over the last 6 months. So that's really nice.
Yeah, that is nice. And so I'm assuming like the smaller the company, the more stuff you're going to be doing because they're like, hey, we need this and that and this. And then in bigger companies, they probably have a very specialized particular thing that each engineer does. Would you say that's accurate, or is there more leeway than that?
That's very accurate. So I worked and was working as an actual engineer, salaried the whole 9 yards for a bottle making facility. And I specifically worked on airveyors and conveyors for the blow molding process. That was it. I didn't work in injection molding. I didn't work on wrapping and strapping, like none of that. I worked on those conveyors. And there were other guys that worked on injection molding, other guys that worked on blow molding, other guys that worked in the warehouse section, optimizing our spacing of materials in the warehouse. Because especially for like major Fortune 500 companies like I worked for, when you make all these bottles for people, you're not making them for a specific, or you're making them for a specific customer, but you're making them several months in advance. So you're making the Christmas bottles in July, forever. Yeah,
Okay.
and like so on and so forth. Oh, hey, these companies have a new springtime that's coming out. Well, we're working on that before the new year. So that way, come next spring, when you've got this new fruit juice that you want to release, we already have the fruit juice bottles ready for you to go 2 to 3 months in advance. So we can get them to your filling facility. You can fill them, cap them, strap them, and then put your label on them and get them to your like distribution warehouses and then your sales centers well in advance. Whereas my senior project that I'm in the middle of right now, I'm working for a very small rubber company, like very, very small rubber company. And they do a lot of subcontracting, but there's probably only 25, 30 employees. So my senior project is fixing their entire shop and process design. So I've been working
Okay.
on everything from lathes to ovens. I mentioned ovens a couple times. I'm working on a big oven project for them right now. And, their cooling process is slow. So how can we make this work a little faster? Because rubber gets really hot and you need it to get hot in order to form it to the right thing. They also have a rubber metal bonding process where they get these little metal poppets and they bond rubber to it. Well, that bonding process is for them pretty problematic because you can get bubbles in it. Well, a bubble in a gasket makes that gasket useless. So you've got to trash that whole thing every time. So how do we eliminate those bubbles? How do we make sure that the rubber bonds to the metal accurately every time? So
Wow. So
yeah.
would you work with like I guess do you just have like material data you're going through about like give me that like a rubber example, right? And you're like, hey, the rubber, this is its, chemical, you know, interaction with XYZ. This is what happens when it expands with heat. So are you inputting all those calculations yourself? Like, is there like another scientist, like a rubber scientist that informs you? Like, I guess how does all that work out?
So that would mostly be like your chemical engineering side.
Mm.
Or the same thing with like your chemist. If you ever wondered what chemists do when they don't go teach like at high schools, they go work for rubber companies or oil companies, and they're
Uh-huh.
looking at the specifics of that. What I'm mostly looking at is your heat process, your bonding process, your cooling process, right? And I'm looking what these guys were doing before I got there is they were just saying, "Oh, this part's trash," and they were measuring it or they were just counting the number of scrap, right? Because scrap is really bad in the manufacturing world. And what I started implementing was a scrap problem process because they have lots of quality control checks. But as soon as you notice something that's bad, don't just write down, oh, it's bad and throw it away. Write down why it's bad. So, like, that's step number one. Identify what your problem actually is. Because maybe your problem is there's a bubble. Okay, well, a bubble could be from the chemical process, like you said. It could be from, oh, we didn't have our mixture just right. Or it could be from, who knows, it could be from the heat process. Maybe there's, especially in injection molding, there's all kinds of little nozzles. Maybe there's a little nozzle that's jammed. And
Hmm.
that nozzle only gets partially jammed every 15 O-rings that you do. Well, so that's why you got to track everything. And we track everything. All kinds of programs, they're called ERP, um, engineering resource programs.
Hmm.
And you're just tracking every little piece of data you can because maybe you notice something, maybe a machine breaks down and then you repair it and then it breaks down a month later. Well, there's probably a reason why it broke down a month later. Maybe the repair was done properly. Maybe a part was broken and you didn't recognize that it was broken. And you track these things. So you can look back at data and be like, oh, well, it broke down 6 years ago in this exact same way. We repaired it, no problems for 6 years. Today it breaks down, claims it's a belt, but then it breaks down a month later with another belt. Oh, hey, there's a trend here. So we track our trends. How, why is this machine breaking down in a certain way over and over and over again? And well, there's probably something more than just the belt. It's probably a pulley system problem, or who knows what else. It could be a thousand other things.
A question I did have about your industrial engineering, I guess, career path. Now, I get the individual stuff, which is what we discussed. So that's the individual contributor, like you are responsible for X, Y, Z.
Mhm.
Is there like a master industrial engineer that oversees the other, like a managerial type, or do you find it more, you know, I guess what's the chain of command there if there is, or do you just report to some non-industrial engineering boss?
Um, Most of the time you report directly. So at my level, I'm reporting to an engineering manager.
Hmm.
So a lot of the jobs I'm looking at are at facilities, doing facility logistics, or at just like general facility processing. So I'll come in as an engineer, like engineer one, right? And I'll report directly to like a chief engineer because a lot of these big facilities you've got, they'll probably have 5, 6, 10 engineers, each of them handling their own process. After some period of time, there's usually an engineering manager or a chief engineer, and he'll handle the day-to-day operations of these 10 guys, make sure that they're task oriented, and he usually reports to a plant manager. Sometimes a plant manager is an engineer, sometimes he's a business guy, um, but that's usually the next step. Is then you're going from chief engineer or engineering manager to a plant manager, and
Mm, I see.
from your plant manager point onwards, being an engineer is nice because it's nice to have that background where you can understand the individual problems going on with a facility, but you don't need to be an engineer for that position. You need to know business. And one of the big things a lot of industrial engineers do is they go get a master's of business or they get a master's of engineering management because it's handy to know how, bless you,
Thank you.
welcome. It's handy to know how to work with people and to manage a team of 25, or especially at the plant manager. The last facility I worked at, we had 260 people. So work in 4 different shifts, working 24/7, 365 days a year. So a lot of work there.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
so first of all, I think you're gonna rise very quickly in those ranks if that's what your plan is. I don't know. Obviously you're just graduating with this degree soon here, but I've got a feeling you're gonna get in there. You're gonna poke around like you do because you're a very curious person. Like, how does this work? Well, why does this run? And then people will be talking like, oh yeah, no, that part of the plant, this is what you're supposed to do. You're not even remotely attached to that portion. And then people are like, oh, what the fuck is this guy? Why does he know all this shit? I
Yeah.
have a feeling that that's what you're gonna do because from my experience in the Marine Corps, you were not only a specialist but also a generalist, but also a specialist in those general topics as well. So you were great at drilling, you were great at doing the color guard stuff, you were great at leadership principles, you're great at the tactical stuff, well your equipment, you knew your job. I'm very excited for you. This seems like a right in your wheelhouse. And obviously, you're going to school, so it's very intentional. But it's good to see you in a place where you can make good money, a good career. You're setting yourself up. I'm very proud of you.
Well, thank
Congratulations.
you, man.
That's I love hearing
I,
all this
I
stuff.
appreciate that. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No problem. So
Mhm.
thank you for walking me through, that's fascinating. I don't know any industrial engineers at all. You're the first. Did you know people who did this job? Is this how did you or like I'm gonna be an industrial engineer?
No, actually. So this wasn't my plan when I started college at all. I started off studying electrical engineering, and I did that for the first 3 years. And I got an internship with a railroad manufacturing company. And they stuck me behind a desk doing power and load calculations, um, because all your railroads are electric in some way. You may even run steam or coal powered engines, but there's electricity on those lines. So there's a huge number of electrical engineers that work on the railroad, and it's a very specialized position, and it's a very well paid position. So I was like, cool, this is going to be a great job. And I worked there for like 7 months as an intern while I was going to college, and at the beginning of the whole pandemic, and I hated it. I absolutely hated it. They had me sitting behind a desk, poring over the same documents day in and day out. You're like, okay, you got to do this. And it's very, very necessary. Like, you want to make sure that when a train runs, it's not just going to break down halfway on the line. Or you want to make sure that you're switching devices when two of them are on, that the switches actually work properly and then they're not going to run headfirst into each other. Because if they do, things just turn out disastrously. Like a train accident of any type, I got to see and report to one incident that went down because there was questions on the electrical side as to if it was an electrical issue, which it wasn't, but it was just disastrous. It was like, oh my god, this is a mess that could have been prevented. So there's so many levels in the railroad, and I hated it. I hated every day. I hated showing up to work at 7 o'clock in the morning. We worked from 7 to 3, and I couldn't wait to get off. I could not wait to get off, dude. They had so many perks and benefits. They'd pay for your gym membership. We had catered lunches every day. And by the end, I was like, I don't want your catered lunch. I just want to leave, man. Like, I didn't want that at all. So I started looking around at my university, and I was like, what else can I do that's something? I didn't want to completely restart. And I was like, okay, I could study this. I could study, a couple different things. And I went and talked with my advisor at the university, and she was like, what do you like? And I was like, well, I like data, and I like answering questions, and I like problem solving. She's like, you should probably look at industrial engineering. So I looked at it, looked at the program, went and met with one of the professors over there, and I was like, cool, let me try this. And since trying this, I've been doing that for like 2 years now, and I love it. It's been
Mm,
fantastic, man. So like, I'm really, really happy doing it.
that's great.
Thank you,
Wow.
man.
What a good I guess whoever that counts or whoever that just like shot that out in the dark. And you're like, you know what? This is a great. Thank you for those words. Now my whole life is kind of set in place.
Dude, that's absolutely how I felt because I wasn't even certain I wanted to be an engineer anymore. I was
Uh-huh.
like, dude, if this is going to be my life for the next 20, 30 years, I'll make great money. I'll have all kinds of benefits, and I'll be bald from pulling out my hair working this job every day. I can't do mentally. I'm a little too, I mean, you've seen me. I'm kind of all over the place, and those guys are so specialized in just three or four things. And they're fantastic at what they do, and the engineers I met who worked on the railroad were unbelievably intelligent. Like actual engineer, like not like drive the train engineers,
Uh-huh.
like actual like the guys designing railroads and managing railroads. Damn, those guys are smart. But that is it's too much for me. It's
Yeah.
way too much.
You're like, no thanks. You know
Yeah, no thanks.
what's a super interesting thing about trains is how they stay on the rails. Are you familiar with the conical shape of the wheels?
Yes.
Is that
Oh,
fascinating? That
dude,
is.
it is.
Could you go
Yeah,
over that just quickly, just for the audience here?
yeah. So you've got your track, right? And your railroad wheels aren't flat, right? So like none of most of your wheels on your vehicles or whatnot, they appear flat, especially because they're rubber, they appear flat. Because trains are so heavy, you can't make them out of rubber. You need to make them out of steel. And they're actually like a convex. Either way, they're literally designed to grip the sides of the rail. And being like on a track as a train goes by, you can actually see the rails bend and flex as like an especially heavy carload goes by. So, dude, it is fascinating looking at the little nuances. Things
Yeah.
like your wheels. You don't realize them just walking by. You're like, oh, that's just a wheel. But there's hundreds of years of mechanical engineering that goes into making sure that this wheel bends at just the right angle, so that way it grips the sides of the rail as it travels along. It's cool stuff.
Yeah. The basically the what was like fascinating to me is the shape. So the wheel is not only like conical, as in like, so like if you're if you got your regular old car wheels here, what they did is they turn the wheels inward, and so
Mm-hmm.
both the wheels, so that it's literally pushing down in the center. So if you did like a center of gravity calculation, it would be pointing directly downwards. So the train is balancing itself. It's not. It's just like this. It's balancing itself when you're going straight. And then a fascinating thing when you're turning a corner, like say you're going around a bend, rather not a corner, I suppose, for a train, you're going around a bend, and the entire train is tilting like this and going around the train, because if you've ever looked at it, the wheels of the train, they're all connected, so there's no differential. So in a car, each wheel axle has a differential in the middle, because when you're going around the corner, the inside wheel spins more than the outside wheel, and you can't have that when they're both just bolted on, connected to an axle with no differential. But what they do is, since the wheels are like this, uh, the inside part is actually bigger. The wheel, it goes like this, right? It kind of caves in. So the inside part is larger and the outside part is smaller. And so when the wheel goes like this, the I guess, like say you're turning right, then the right side of the wheels have a smaller distance to travel, so they're able to spin more. And on the other side, this diameter is longer, and so this is perfectly matched. So this wheel is able to spin slower and longer, and this wheel is spinning faster. And then the whole train is like this, and then it comes around the corner and it balances itself back out and just going straight. I'm like, it's just like, what the fuck, dude? Like, good thing I didn't make trains. I would have never thought of that. I would have been like, I don't know what to do here, guys. I guess we'll have to make like, I don't know. Like, we're fucked. We're doing cars. Trains are too
Yeah.
complicated.
Well, and I didn't even think to talk about that aspect of it because when a vehicle turns, obviously your inside wheel is rotating fast no matter what. That happens with cars. It happens with all
Yep.
kinds of things. So they figured all that out with trains 200 years ago when guys were using an abacus.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If I don't have my
Yeah.
calculator with me anywhere, oh, I'm screwed, right? I need Excel for everything. These dudes are literally like hand writing, hand jamming, all of that, and they figured all of that out. So it's unbelievable how trains have progressed, and they are incredibly safe. But obviously, when incidences occur, they are problematic. Yeah,
Yeah, as we found out, but
as
it's
we
it's
found out.
yeah, in Ohio. Shout out to those
Yes.
people who aren't getting any fucking answers from anybody.
Right. That's very, topical thing going on right now. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I don't know anything about it, but from what it seems like, people are fucked. There's toxic chemicals, and nobody's fessing up to anything. They're like, it did happen. We just burned millions and millions of pounds of whatever the fuck that was and killed all the wildlife. But it's,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. But I mean, I'm certainly not into the weeds in that, so I can't really, I'm not qualified to say what happened and what didn't. But that blows, Ohio. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're thinking of you.
Yeah. I can tell you from the one incident I got to respond to and see on the railroad side, those railroads have teams of lawyers, like teams and teams of
Mm,
lawyers. So you have a federal authority called the Federal Railroad Authority, who has probably the most powerful lawyers of any federal agency I've ever heard of. They don't lose in court. So one of the things that happens is all these big railroad companies, Union Pacific, whoever, when there's any kind of incident, they have 25 Harvard educated lawyers, right? Like these Ivy League guys show up and they are asking unbelievable numbers of questions on the engineering side, on just your personnel side, on logistics side. Like these people are doing unbelievable amounts of investigation. So somebody somewhere is asking lots of questions and knows the answer.
right.
We're just not hearing about it because we're not in the know. You know what I mean? We're not important people. So, but somebody is asking a lot of questions and
Right.
we're just not hearing about it yet.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I'm sure somebody out there they probably knew right away. They're like, "Oh yeah." Like
Oh, yeah. No, they,
it's very evident what happened here, but when you're mentioning all these lawyers, then they're probably like, "Hey, turn to your page 25 in your SOP. You're not to talk about this until we have every detail figure this out." So, yeah, cuz that's,
yes.
especially in a hazardous like bio, scenario where the entire environment was affected.
Yeah. I guarantee so you have all kinds of qualifications to work on the railroad too. So you have to actually be zone qualified to work on a railroad. You can't just be blanket, oh, I can work on every railroad. When you go to work for a railroad, just in order to be on the tracks in a region, you have to be qualified with the Federal Railroad Authority, and then you have to be qualified with that region's railroad. So if you're in Los Angeles County of California, you're qualified through the Los Angeles Railroad Authority. But if you're in San Diego County, one county over, you have to be qualified through a different railroad authority. If you go up to San Francisco, you're at a different railroad authority. If you're in Las Vegas, there's a different railroad authority. So there's not just, I mean, there's specialists in, like East Palestine, Ohio. I guarantee there's like an Eastern Ohio Railroad Authority in the Cleveland region, and those guys have, I mean, they know their tracks just backwards and forwards. They know that area really, really well. So
Right.
your traffic inspectors, your engineers, whoever, they're able to know. They probably knew fairly quickly what happened, and then there's probably a bunch of questions with like your handling authority because there's all kinds of rules and regulations on how you transport, hazardous chemicals in an intermodal way. Because I'm assuming it's probably intermodal, and who knows? Like if somebody knows the answer to what's going on, but
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And when you're talking about all these like structures set up in the rail industry, I've never really thought about this, but that makes sense because that literally built this nation, right? That's how we got everything done, right? All these
yes,
just laid out these things, these rails that connected the entire country, and that's how we were able to transport anything across, right? Because you're not gonna, they didn't have cars back then that could traverse the mountains and stuff like that, and man, like, good thing people did that shit before us. Again, like they just laid out all this foundation. They paved through mountains. I'm like, we're so spoiled. We're like growing up rich. You know what I mean? Like, not in a monetary way, but like in an infrastructure way. We're so spoiled here, man.
dude, it's unbelievable, and it's like I know you've traveled and lived overseas, obviously, right?
Uh huh.
You're born in Europe,
Uh huh.
and even the differences just between like European railroads and American railroads, like everyone wants to talk smack and be like, oh, we don't have enough trains here in the United States. We have all kinds of trains. Amtrak runs all over the country. Nobody rides those trains. You know what I mean? Like Amtrak's just empty going from Los Angeles to Phoenix. Yeah, you can take a train from LA to Phoenix, but nobody wants to ride that train. So,
Yeah.
because we have all these amazing roads and I can drive to Phoenix in 4 hours rather than getting on a train and it's going to take me 24 hours to get there. I
Yeah.
could do it. I just don't want to, because I could get there so much faster with a plane.
Yeah.
So, like we have all this other unbelievable infrastructure. You're right. Like we are spoiled,
Yeah.
and like I can go to the grocery store and I can buy beef from Nebraska and I can buy, a soda that was made in Los Angeles and I can buy onions from Mexico and like we're very spoiled people.
Right, because we got not only the trains, we got the semi trucks, we got yeah, it's because the U.S. is so big. It is just I guess a beautiful feat of engineering that we can not only fly stuff in, we can drive stuff in, we can, and yeah, I got strawberries here and bananas like year round. I was actually going to the store and it's like kind of winter time right now, and my son was like, "Can we get a watermelon?" I'm like, "Son, it's winter." But then he's like, "No, there's watermelons right there." And I'm like, "Damn it!" I was like, "Fuck!" I was like, "All right, dude." He's like 4, like telling me, he's like, "Dude, it's fine. Calm down. We got modern technology here, Dad." Um,
Yeah.
I kind of almost wish we didn't have as much availability to food. Like it'd be kind of nice to have like some cyclicality going and like, okay, we can't get these vegetables this time and uh just the option to always just have whatever you want all the time in and of itself like takes something. I can't put my finger on it, but it takes something away from something. You know what I mean?
I think it takes the want and desire away from us. We can be greedy 100% of the time.
Yeah.
Like, and like greed is good, right? It helps people give some drive and helps you want to grow, like in a big sense greed is good, but greed is also bad because well, when you're greedy, what do you want? You just want more and more and more. And we don't have to wait. You're absolutely right. Like I can get my watermelons from South America right now, even though it's February, it's the middle of winter, right? And we're like, yeah, I want a watermelon. Okay, cool. I can get one.
Yeah.
There's no hunger. So, we're a gluttonous society, you could say.
Yeah. Have you, just on that note, and we don't have to go down this rabbit hole, but have you
Yeah.
watched Ancient Apocalypse on Netflix by any chance?
No, I have not.
Okay. Okay.
You
Maybe,
want to give me a rundown real quick?
sure. Yeah, I'd love to. So
Yeah.
there's this guy named Graham Hancock
Okay.
who he's essentially a journalist, and for the last like 30 years, he's been studying, traveling the world, like doing really deep sea diving, excavating sites and looking through all these old literature. And what he believes happened is there was at least one ancient, advanced civilization of humanity that was wiped out during a period called the Younger Dryas, which was the end of the last ice age. So during a period of about 1,200 years, from 12,800 years ago to
Mhm.
11,600 years ago, there was an insane amount of change and catastrophic things that happened to the Earth. So there's evidence of asteroids and meteors plummeting all over the Earth. Particularly, the very famous ones are in North America. So at the time, like I said, it was a global ice age. So most of North America was covered in a giant ice sheet for the old like land bearing bridge or whatever and all that
Yeah.
stuff that was instantly melted from an impact of an asteroid. So asteroid comes in and from the Taurid meteor stream, so perhaps a meteor or an asteroid. I think the only difference between an asteroid and a meteor is maybe the uh, either the trail that it produces or the size of them. Perhaps I think asteroids are just much bigger. But
It's
either
whether
way,
it strikes or not.
oh, okay. Oh, is that a
Yeah.
thing? Meteors out in space, asteroid.
Meteor strikes, asteroid just flies by.
Okay, very well. Well, oh, it says it's like magma and lava, like magma getting
Basically,
inside.
yeah,
Okay,
Magman.
very well. Well, oh fucking
Yeah.
man. Okay, so there's objects flying around in space. They came down, and not just one, but many, many. All like there's in Europe and whatnot, but the one in North America hit the ice cap and liquefied it in an instant, and you had 1,000 foot waves just smashing through North America and just decimated this place. And there's all this crazy geological evidence. And Graham partners with a bunch of other people, but a person that he partners with is Randall Carlson, who's just expert geologist. And
Mhm.
he does like these beautiful lectures on like, hey, check out the landscape in North America right here. This is where like 10 gajillion pounds of water went through in like seconds or minutes or whatever. I just plowed and carved the landscape. So, and that was happening throughout for 1,200 years, just all over the place. And what and he believes one of the reasons why every single ancient culture on Earth has stories about giant catastrophic floods, you know, like the Mayans do, the Vikings do, the Christians do. All everybody has story of, hey, humanity was getting a little, you know, they're getting a little what's it called, little,
Little
you know,
wild,
a
basically.
little
Yeah.
while out of hand, and then the gods got
Yeah.
angry, wiped everybody out in a big flood, and that's like every culture. There's not a single ancient culture out there that doesn't have a myth or a legend about a giant flood. And what he believes is that is a leftover remnant of an advanced civilization. And so he goes to all these places, and in that Netflix series, he shows a bunch of ancient sites that he believes dates way back, like 20, 30,000 years ago, that are just these marvels of engineering, just beautiful, like giant stone structures and everything like that. And he was mostly ridiculed and just like, oh, this guy's not a fucking scientist. He doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. Until I think it was like the early 2000s, perhaps the 90s, when this site called Göbekli Tepe was unearthed in Turkey. Like there's just, I think some farmer dude was just walking around and he like saw something sticking out. I was like, what the hell is this thing? And he like dug it out as like this like stone. And then eventually over time they unearthed this in just huge megalithic site of these like 1,000 ton blocks that are just like they're perfectly erected, and there's like 3D carvings of animals, and it's just massive site that's a temple, and it dated back to 11,600 years ago, which is the exact date of the end of the Younger Dryas, and it was buried intentionally. And
Right.
so, if anything about like what we perceive as the actual history of humans, civilization started 6,000 years ago, right? It was the Sumerians and
Right.
all that.
Yeah.
This site is showing that there's no possible way a society that's hunter gatherer could have not only gotten like hundreds of giant megalithic stones, but carved them. They
Mhm.
carved animals in them and they placed them on top of each other. I mean, we're talking about like 1,000 ton fucking like pillar of like granite or whatever the hell it's made of. There's like stacked on top of each other, and it's beautiful, and everything's precise, and it's just engineering. And so they discovered that side, and all the geologists are like, oh fuck. It's like
Yeah.
we've been talking shit about this guy, and our
Yeah.
only defense was, dude, there's nothing as old as that. So obviously there's no civilization that's ever existed. And so he goes all around the earth, and it's fascinating, and there's just all this evidence of astronomically literate civilizations that at like all these temples that they keep unearthing that are perhaps going back into the ice age are perfectly aligned to like the summer equinox. So like when like imagine a giant stone temple that perhaps people either pray in or maybe even live in if there's like boards and rooms and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The sunlight they're engineered in such a way that the sunlight comes in and pierces and like scatters into every room and everything's illuminated. So like, you and all your buddies or whoever the, your tribe or whatever, I don't know what was back then, but you
Yeah.
all get perfectly awakened at the same time, and
Um,
all your structures are facing all these constellations, and so yeah. Long story short, human civilization, engineering, math, geometry, perhaps goes back tens of thousands of years, and God knows how far back, because we just recently had a discovery. So we have all these like humans have all these predecessors that we kind of know about because of skeletons and that we've unearthed, and also tools and sites where like tools are being made.
yeah.
We thought they're about 100, 200,000 years old. We just found a site that dates humanity back to 300,000 years ago. And these are people with the same size brain. They had culture, they had religion, they could draw, they made tools. And then there's also like stone tools that we find, like axes and stuff like that, dating back to like
Ooh.
3 million years ago. 3 million years. There was human type creatures that were relatively the same intelligence as us. And so Graham's like, so you're telling me we've been running around for millions of years, and all of a sudden, just 6,000 years ago, we decided to group together and build civilization and do agriculture? He's like, fuck no. He's like, I think we've been doing this for a very, very, very long time, but the way Earth is, you get plowed by a meteor, civilization resets, and you're done. You have like, there's a point in time, I think, proven where humanity was down to like 1,000 people, and that's what we can like prove based on archaeological records. But imagine
Really?
millions and millions of years, like every 10,000 or so years, you're getting plowed by an asteroid. The Earth is covered, like at the Younger Dryas, for example, meteor
Mhm.
plows, Earth is covered with a sheet of dust, ash, and everything else. One side of the planet is being cooked, completely everything dies. Like I think it was like 70+% of the megafauna and plant life got extinct in the archaeological record, like 12,000 whatever years ago, in an instant. And then you just see this layer of death just everywhere, just like
Ah,
bones and bones, and everything's dead. There was no sunlight. Nothing was coming through. Barely anybody survived. And then you have all these cultures saying they're like, yeah, we were just kind of just fucking walking around, hunting and gathering, and then a bearded man comes on a boat, and he taught us agriculture, civilization, math, and all this other shit, and rebuilt civilization across
right.
the world. So long story short, check it
Yeah, no,
out.
it's cool. Okay. No,
Check it
that's
out.
fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm way too deep into that right now.
I can tell. I can tell you're getting into it. But that's cool, man. Yeah, no, I'd never heard of that. I mean, I know I've definitely heard the fact that there must have been an ancient flood
Yeah.
because it's way too common amongst separate societies. Oh, hey, this society, which never spoken with this other one, both talk about a flood which wipes out everybody. Wow, that's hey, maybe there's something to that, but it sounds like this dude really got into the weeds of it, and it sounds like I mean, I'm interested. I'll probably go check it out sometime. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me know. Let me know what you think. Yeah, super fascinating. Um, and along that line, sorry to rabbit hole this, but this is kind of,
Cool. Go ahead.
I guess, adjacent to this. They
Hmm.
also think that there was some technology that we don't even have in order to move these giant stones. So, for example, there's all these quarries that have like granite or marble or whatever, and then they find sites, for example, in Egypt, like where the pyramids were built, of like all these, like 1,500-ton stones that are perfectly geometrically cut into like rectangles or whatever, stacked on top of each other to make pyramids. And the quarry or the mountains where they would get this from is like 500 miles away. And so if you do the math, you're like, what the fuck is this? And then you
Yeah.
go to all these places, and then you just see these perfectly carved out, because you can see where these things came from, and just like like it's like a almost like an ice cream scoop, just like just chunks out of the ground, and then you can match that to like the some of the pyramid sites and some of the other structures, and then you're like, like the notion that like slaves built the pyramids is just fundamentally flawed, because these things
Mhm.
are so perfectly engineered that like there's like a lot of the stones are placed on top of each other that you can't even like fit a needle through them. They're just perfectly cut, and this is like marble and granite. And so if you're off by like a millimeter, by the time you get to the top, you're gonna be all fucked up, all sideways. But these things are perfect, and they're 1,000-ton stones stacked on top of each other. And this is
Yeah.
supposedly built like 4,000 years ago with like slave labor. It's like, okay, bro, like like you know what I
Yeah,
mean,
right,
like.
sure, yeah.
But yeah, anyways, so part of this like old technology that they might be speculating is uh, perhaps some sort of frequency device that essentially takes the vibrations of each molecule or of each atom, and they have like a chart of like, hey, and carbon atom vibrates at this frequency, this vibrates at that frequency. If you're able to
Mhm.
sort of either, I don't know, don't know the details, but match that sort of frequency, you might be able to just slice matter, any type of matter, like butter. And it's not like a cutting or a laser, it's you're vibrating at a very precise frequency, and you're just taking that layer out and just like, yep, here you go, and you're able to make super precision cuts. And I think they're experimenting with something like that now called like plasmoid technology or something. And there's this like company who's been testing this stuff in the Maldives for like 5+ years,
Mhm.
and they've been super secretive about it because they know that all their predecessors that try to do stuff like this, like Nikola Tesla and like all this, they got just shit on, especially if it disrupts industries. And right now, there's a
Okay.
lot of holds on industries, and so perhaps in the next few months they're going to come out with the schematics and open source this kind of stuff, and be like, hey, this is how it's done. This is what it is. But I don't have, any information on that. So unfortunately, this is just a super teaser.
It's so cool, dude. It's a fascinating thing to talk about because I mean, there's definitely technologies that have been lost over the years. One I know of, just like off the top of my head, right? I don't know if you've ever been to the Naval Academy at Annapolis, Maryland.
I have not. It's very
So
particular
very particular,
example.
right? So there's two churches on the campus there. There's the Christian church and the Catholic church on campus. And I took a tour of this years ago, and in the Christian church, I believe, all the windows were blue, right? And they have a bluish tint to them. Well, the Naval Academy was built in early 1800s, late 1700s, something like that. And the factory that built this specialized blue glass burned down, but they'd built all these windows. So as windows have gotten cracked and broken at this church over the last couple hundred years, they have had to replace some of the windows, but they haven't been able to replace the windows with the same type of blue glass because the recipe for that blue glass was lost, and no one bothered to figure out how to replace it or how to make that glass again. So you can see the difference in the window. Like this one will have like a baby blue tint, and the one next to it will have like an ocean blue tint. And then like it's that way all throughout the church. You can see the windows that have gotten cracked and broken and the ones that haven't over the last 200 years. So
Yeah.
it's just a cool, and that was 200 years ago. So I can only imagine the technology that's been lost in the last 6,000 years or 60,000 years. There's definitely stuff out there that's been lost and that we've just never bothered to fix and replace.
Yeah. It's not like civilization as far as we, have history of. It's not like we've ever had billions of people before. You know what I mean? Like, so it was probably a very, very isolated particular technologies, because like, you know I think most technology is driven by just crazy like experimental accidents, like, you know what I mean, like they're,
Mhm.
or just hard just hardcore, just sitting there and doing math and engineering, like Isaac Newton, just sitting there and just plowing, making calculus real quick. Or Nikola Tesla's like, why don't we just use energy? Well, Michael Faraday, who essentially was the father of all engines, right? Any sort of electrical motion. Like without them, thousands of years of darkness that we know of, thousands of years for, is relatively the same since like, you go back like 2000 years until like, I don't even know, like the 1800s. No, it was not that much. You had some castles, you had some people grouping together, doing stuff, but there wasn't like, they had metal, right? Like blacksmithing that whole time, but they never figured out, and the electricity was the one thing to like, oh, now we have electricity, but how do you get this like motion going? And then you're like, oh shit, you can just, you can create electricity through whatever means, and then all of a sudden you have power, energy. But that's one particular thing that we did, right? And so I think you're totally right. There could have been these pockets of absolute geniuses or groups of geniuses that came up with this incredible, we're talking about the train engineers, like God, like that's beautiful, and they probably did that all the time. And then,
Yeah.
there's only like 20 people in their village, and then they got cancer, and then they fucking passed away. And then everyone's like, hey, do you know how he did that laser shit? And they're like, oh,
Yeah.
dude, I don't know.
No clue,
Yeah,
man. Yeah.
yeah. And then it's just gone. It's just gone
Yeah.
forever.
No, and it's sad to think that things didn't get recorded. You
Yeah.
and I have talked personally, like I lost a bunch of history type things of like my own personal history. I mean, that's just me with like a phone, like a mobile phone losing history. Imagine the things that were lost before record keeping was so easy with a cloud system.
But yeah, like
Oh.
the Library of Alexandria. Are you familiar with that?
I've heard of it. Yeah, like the ancient wonder of the world.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
this was, I think in Egypt. But basically for like thousands of years is where all these scholars would go there and put all their nation's history and knowledge and like exactly what we're talking about, like inventions and all this shit. And then just over time, like people, like for thousands of years there was just like incredible artifacts there, and people would, oh, like I'm talking about like Plato, Socrates, all these people would go there and just read all day, and all these scrolls from all the different languages, right? So there's like a bunch of Rosetta Stone type things. And then they're just like, I think one day got like burned down, and then some guy who got in power like didn't really care about upkeeping it, and then it's just like mostly lost to history. And we're like, dude, like what are you doing, bro? Like, but I guess it's hard to upkeep anything for a couple thousand years because people don't give a shit past their lifetime, at least nowadays.
Yeah. Well, so have you ever heard of the Napoleonic Library
No.
in Syria?
Uh-uh.
So Napoleon, one of his big conquests was 1802, I think, 1803, and he went to Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Iran, like that whole Persia area, and he conquered most of it, and then he established a library I believe it was in Syria, but it might have been in Iraq. And it was a Napoleonic library. And it was like, I'm not going to say it's identical to the Library of Alexandria, but he had all kinds of French scholars, and they upkept that for hundreds of years until I think it was the Arab Spring, and someone burned it all down. Like they just torched the whole thing because they're like, oh, this is a monument to Western society. We need to destroy this. And you're like, no, dude, that's 200 years of engineering and just unbelievable documentation that's just gone, like just gone.
Oh
So,
man.
yeah, and that was only, I mean, that's within our lifetimes. It was only 200 years of material just disposed of. So I
Yeah.
can only imagine the devastation of losing the Library of Alexandria or something like that.
Oh
Yeah.
man. Yeah, it's
Mhm.
like a tragedy. And then just when you think about the scope of like, you're like, oh yeah, 100 years, 200 years, that's not that bad. And then you're like 2000 years, like, oh geez, like that unimaginable generations of generations of generations, and the shift in society. And you have one ruler for like 30 years, which seems like a long time, but then another guy comes in, conquers you. And then, just looking at the history of of like the Mongols, Alexander the Great, the Greeks, the Romans, the Italians, and then you're like, this just changes all the time. It's like nothing can really be kept permanent, and that's with like a without ecological disasters or meteors crashing, right? That's like when everything is relatively stable, like, and then you get to 20,000 years, and then your brain just is like bzz, like bzz,
Yeah.
like what do you want me? And then you just add, it's like 10,000 years, like it's fucking butter on toast. You're like 30,000 years ago, maybe 40. It's like, whoa, dude, that you're like that 10,000 years. That's like that anything could have happened. Anything.
Right.
Like we could have, like, for example, I think if a meteor, or say multiple meteors, say for the next 300 years, we have 5 meteor strikes in here, Europe, Asia, like all, like say all the continents get blasted, uh, and and say we don't have the capacity to upkeep civilization as it is, and to have metals and electricity, because we literally have to just survive, and hopefully, we, 10% of us, if that, survive. Uh, every trace of this civilization, all the metal technology, that's eroded completely. There's no, like, the only thing that would be kept is stone, literally. Stone
Right.
stuff, or like all the buildings that we have, all the houses, my camera, this microphone would be completely disintegrated in just a few thousand years, right? And so that's scary to think about, right? Which is, I guess, why like Elon Musk is like, we should probably populate Mars too. It's not a bad idea.
Right. Yeah. No. And the populate like the idea of populating Mars is crazy that humans will finally have interstellar travel, and it's unbelievably complex. There's problems we've never seen before. But I'm all for it. I absolutely think we should go to Mars and we should go beyond. I I mean, personally talking here, I don't think we ever should have stopped going to the moon. Haven't gone to the moon since 73, 72, 73. Like, why the hell not? Like we should have been we should have a goddamn colony on the moon. And I should be an astronaut. You know what I mean? Like, if NASA's listening, hey, I'm interested. Like, let me go to space, right? Let me be the guy on Mars.
Yeah,
So,
you could be a an engineer there, and well, I mean, technically, I bet there would be room for exactly somebody like you to
oh,
do
probably. Yeah.
to do some shit on Mars or the moon. They'll be like, hey, how much? I don't, I, I don't know. Like, what? I guess what would you, if you had to be a part of a moon mission, and then maybe subsequently a Mars mission? What? How could you see yourself plugging into that scenario?
Probably with packaging. So one of the really complex things that I like to look at is how do you package material in order to get it from A to B, right? It's part of the whole industrial engineering thing. Like, there's so many ways that we have figured out how to move things, but how many ways have we not figured out? And how many inefficiencies have we had? Like, everybody loves conveyor belts, but conveyor belts break. So how do you change your conveyor belts or your rollers or things like that? And I would love to look at what do you really need in order to survive on Mars? Because you're going to need food, you're going to need water, and then you're going to need all your technological equipment. You're going to need a bed. You can't just sleep on rocks. Like, even if you've got just like a whoopee or something. Like, you just got a blanket. How do you package a blanket in order to travel to Mars? How do you package
Yeah.
a pillow, right? Because you want to make your people as comfortable as possible, even though it's going to be a very uncomfortable environment. And then how do you protect things, right? Because Mars doesn't have an atmosphere like us, right? So you're getting cooked by the sun if or you're really, really exposed to the environment, right? So how do you prevent how do you keep these people safe? And then one of the things I've read is that they want to, when they first go to Mars, they want to try and find cave structures, so that way they can put people in caves, and then once they're in caves, they can have them like travel around uh, on the surface and then retreat back to the cave and make the cave almost like a little bubble where you can build your own environment, because it's already airproof, waterproof, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you get in and you know fix a cave so that way it's comfy? How do you design the tools, oh, you're going to get up there and you're going to need screwdrivers. You're going to need drills. You're going to need hammers. You're going to need all these incredibly complex little things in order to get to Mars and survive. Things that we take for granted. I can turn on a light bulb. How do you get light bulbs to Mars? Because a light bulb is like this gaseous filled thing. Well, maybe there's a better way to make a light bulb. That's just
Right.
something I would love to look at. Like, how do we make a light bulb more compact? Well, we know it's hard glass structure with a metal coil running through it that's filled with gas. Well, maybe rather than a hard glass structure, maybe we could like a soft bag structure, and you make like an assemble your own light bulb kit. I mean,
Yeah.
not saying that that's definitely the answer, but maybe that's feasible. Here's a light bulb kit, and that allows us to package our light bulbs a little differently.
Yeah.
So
What I would do for you mentioned beds.
yes, yeah.
I'd be like everyone's sleeping in hammocks. That's what we're doing.
So
Yeah,
well, and that
that's compact. You break it down, and then it's like, good luck with your back problems. But hey, man,
yeah,
you're on Mars.
you're on Mars, right? Like, sorry, we'll come get you in 6 months, right? Like that would be cool, and maybe that's a solution, right? Maybe across these caves that they've got, in Mars, all these astronauts could be sleeping in hammocks. So,
That
yeah,
would be ridiculous. Your hammock rips. You're like, hey, man, could I please bunk in with you today?
yeah, right. Well,
You
now get out your sewing kit, dude, and start sewing your hammock back together,
Yeah,
right?
you would need. I think you precisely, and that's, or you would need generalists to do all this stuff, and I think that's what astronauts are, right? They're the pilots, they're the engineers. They have to be able to literally do everything possible
Yeah,
that might go wrong, right? In like, say you go do like a spacewalk, everybody on board. If something malfunctions on the ship or whatever, they know how to fix it. Because if they don't, it's like, okay, Johnny has a heart attack, and now I guess we're just here, right? I'm
yeah.
assuming they all got a. Oh man, that's intense.
Well, so I got some cool things like that when I was a kid. I think I was 13. I got to meet an astronaut. His name was Norm Thagard. I'd never heard of this guy before that. I was like, oh, cool, astronaut. Like I was 13. I didn't realize the true scope of what this man had done until I got a little older and I was able to read about him. And Norm Thagard had gone and gotten an engineering degree, and then he joined the military and been a pilot, right? He'd been a fighter jet pilot, and then he'd left the military and gone to medical school. So this dude was engineer, pilot, doctor, and then was one of the first astronauts in the space shuttle program. And I think he
Mm.
threw 5 flights on the space shuttle. But like this dude, like engineer, pilot, doctor, you know what I mean? Like he's all the qualifications
Yeah,
you need for a guy to go to space. Like he's the guy. Oh, Norm is the guy. And
yeah,
there's a lot of them are like that. They're, oh, I'm doctor of this and I'm a pilot. I'm engineer of this and I'm this doctor, or I'm they're specialized. They're generalist, you're right, but they're also hyper specialized in multiple fields. I've done these 3 things, I've done these 4 things, et cetera, et cetera. So
yeah. I guess all of them would have to be at least some sort of medically trained, like doctor level type. Because you don't want like, because these are what the top a billionth percent, right, of people that go to space. So like if you have some guy who you described as amazing, whatever, maybe a genius and a billion different things, but he's like 80% as good as a doctor, as the rest of them, you're like, hey, sorry, we're gonna have to pass on you because this guy has everything
yeah,
you have plus more. The competition level to be an astronaut must be, not to be uh, too punny, but out of this world.
yeah, no, dude, that's absolutely true. I know I looked at it one time, and just your entry level, because they'll have publications every couple of years. NASA will put out, be like, hey, we're looking for the class of like 2035 for astronauts. Are you interested? Or like, and they just put it on their website. They don't advertise, they don't do anything like that. And they'll get 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 applicants. And in order to just be an applicant, right, you have to have a bachelor's degree, you have to have a master's degree in something. You can't just have, like, and you have to show research in a STEM or engineering field, like, or you have to have some kind of medical degree. Pilots are always welcome, those types. Like, there's a couple things they look for, but like, bam, you got to have a master's in a STEM field. So like that cuts down huge percentage of the population right there. I'll probably never get a master's, right? Like just not necessary. But you have to have a master's in a STEM field, and then you have to show research, right? So, oh yeah, I have a master's, but I've also been conducting this kind of research for Lockheed Martin, or I work at this university and I've been doing this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, like of the even the just the people that want to apply, if you don't hit these wickets, they don't care. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you're not good enough to be an astronaut. Sorry.
Yeah.
So yeah,
It's really funny that you're so intimately aware of all this stuff. This is very much like you. If you don't mind, could we
yeah. Go
pivot
ahead.
to your maybe a little pre Marine Corps history and like, I guess what led you to join the Marine Corps? What did you think about it? And I know you're looking all this shit up. I bet you knew every single thing about all the ranks and every before you even joined. Could you walk me through your thought process and then maybe what you got in the Marine Corps for? What were you trying to do, and maybe how it went?
Absolutely, man. So we'll start at birth, and then I'll just
Okay.
feed you through my childhood. We'll run through that pretty fast,
Yeah.
and then I'll get to the Marine Corps. So, was born in Novato, California, up in the Bay Area. Well, my dad was still in the Navy, and then when I was a little baby, my dad retired like pretty much right after I was born. So we moved to Temecula, California, and spent most of my childhood growing up there. Um, During that time, my dad was going to college, and we lived with my grandmother. And then when my dad graduated from college, we moved in with my great grandma. We had a couple acres of land out in like the wine country area of Southern California here. Lived out there for quite a few years until I graduated high school. During that time, I liked acting and being in plays. My parents were very, how do I describe it? They supported me doing any kind of weird activities, right?
Hmm.
So if I wanted to do plays, they supported me doing plays. If I wanted to play the guitar, they supported me playing the guitar. We didn't have a lot of money. My dad was retired, retired enlisted, and my parents owned a landscaping company for a couple of years. I grew up on a flower farm. We had bought all the stock from a bearded Irish flower farm. So like that was every weekend for years, was working on the property, and we had the farm in the backyard. Um, but they always wanted me to at least do one thing to help build my brain grow, and they wanted to do one thing to help me physically grow. So I always had to do a sport, and I always had to do something socially, right? So for many years, I was acting in plays. I also swam. I ran track for a number of years, which because I was a little fat, they just put me doing the shot put. And then when I got older, I started swimming and swam for a long time, and then wound up playing water polo. So whereas on the side time, I was taking piano lessons, I was taking banjo lessons. I played the banjo for a number of years. Then I played the guitar. Um, More acting, singing, dancing, stage and theater, speech classes, etiquette classes, you name it. My parents wanted me to have a very holistic, or not just holistic, but like well-rounded childhood. So there was a lot to me growing up, and there was a lot of cool things and opportunities that I got because my parents were really supportive of that. And then they didn't just enforce it; they forced it. Hey, Steve, we know you're not too interested in playing the banjo anymore. What are you doing now? What are you doing to make yourself a better, stronger, more intelligent human who's more well-rounded? So, graduated high school. Honestly, was way too lazy in high school. I know you talk about how I have drive, dude. I didn't do homework from probably the end of freshman year until I graduated. This is a senior. I didn't do homework. I just didn't do it. I was like,
Me,
nah, I don't want to do that. Like,
me
like,
too. Me
right.
too.
I think that's most of us at 15, 16, 17. It's like, no, I don't want to do this. You know what I mean? So, and I'm amazed. I graduated with like a 3.4 GPA. I'm amazed I made that. Right? Like, it's unbelievable. It was pure luck and just charisma. My teacher's like, I guess Steve deserves a B. I should have failed. Like, so graduate high school, and like we didn't have money for me to go to college. My parents had lost a decent amount of money in the stock market crash of 2008. What savings they had, pretty much gone. My mom had been going to college. My mom was only just graduating college when I graduated high school. So like she was job hunting. She eventually wound up as a teacher. Um, so it was kind of like, oh, well, what do you do? And I was like, okay, well, I'd really wanted to be a pilot, and I'd really wanted to be a military pilot for a long time. I'd been fascinated by space in particular, but flight as well. And I was like, okay, let's see what I could do to be a pilot. How do I go be a pilot? Well, in the civilian world, you got to go to a couple different universities, and then you got to go to a flight school, and you just got to crank out your hours and eventually get your commercial pilot's license. And it's a competitive field. I was like, okay, well, or I could join the military and do that. So the military was in the back of my head. I'd applied to the service academies and hadn't gotten in. You know, the Air Force Academy isn't going to take you if you got a 3.4 GPA, and you know you're not that special. You know, and I wasn't. I wasn't special enough to join one of the military academies. So I wound up going to community college, and I was in community college for a year. I'd actually been going to community college while I was in high school, and had taken classes while I was a high school student at the local community college, and then I had continued to go to school there, and was not having it, man. I was taking like some aerospace classes and some history of aeronautics classes, as well as like your standard math and English, and I just didn't want to do any of it. I was like, I'm 18, and then I turned 19 years old. I want to go out and see the world. I want to travel. I've been reading all these unbelievable things about people in books and magazines, and oh, this guy's, you know, conquering like and climbing in Tibet, and this guy's doing this. And I was like, I want to see the world. And my dad had been retired from the Navy, so I'd seen all of the pictures as a kid and heard all his stories. Because my dad was a Navy corpsman for his entire career in the Navy, and had been with the Marine Corps most of the time. So I'd grown up with all these unbelievable stories of like, oh, the Navy was cool. Here's this time on ship, but the Marine Corps was really cool. And here's what the Marine Corps was like in the 70s, you know, and like here's what the Marine Corps was like in the 80s, and here's what the Navy was like. And I was fascinated by this. I just thought it was the coolest thing on planet Earth. So I'm sitting in my U.S. history class, like History 101, as a freshman at community college, and I'm sitting next to this Navy vet, and he would tell me all the time. He's like, "Oh yeah, the Navy was the greatest thing, man. Had the time of my life in the Navy." Blah 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 blah. And I was like, "Oh, cool. Um, maybe I should join the Navy." So I went into the Navy recruiter's office, and I was like, "Hey man, um, I want to join the Navy. My dad was in the Navy. Blah blah blah. You know, I really want to see the world. Like I want to travel and see something and gain some experience, and get money for college because I couldn't afford to go to college. You know, like community college was where I was at. I refused to take loans to go to university, so community college is what I had." And he was like, "Yeah, no problem, Navy recruiter, blah 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 blah." He was talking to me forever, and he was like, "I really want you to join the nuke program and the Navy like nuclear submarine technician program." And I was like, "Oh, okay, cool. Like it's interesting, you know." Like, and I got to thinking about it. I'd taken the ASVAB. I did pretty well on the ASVAB, and I was like, "Huh, like maybe I don't want to be stuck in a submarine all the time." So, because I'd been going back and forth to Navy, you know, I'd started to fill out the paperwork, and I walked across the parking lot one day, right? Because all the military recruiters are always in a like a lump together. I walked across the parking lot. I was like, "Oh, I don't want to join the Army or the Air Force recruiters, right? Let me talk to the Marine recruiter." And I talked to the Marine recruiter, and I was hooked, like day one. You know what I mean? I don't know how he got me at 19, but like he got me, and he was like, "You want to join the Marine Corps?" And I was like, "I really want to travel." He's like, "I've been to 5 different continents. I've seen the whole world, blah, 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 blah." And he just hooked me, man. And I got sold in the Marine Corps at 19 years old, you know, like this kid who was just lost looking for, you know, some money for school and some adventure. And I initially joined, I wanted to be a combat engineer, was what I had wanted to do. And I was like, cool, let me be, because I thought it was a tangible skill, right? Oh, I can learn to operate a chainsaw. I can learn to drive heavy equipment, you know, like in that whole like combat engineering field, like, you know, you could be a generator mechanic, you can work on utilities, you can learn like a tangible skill where you could get a job and like afterwards, because that was another thing that always been stressed to me. My dad had always said you need to have a skill or like a trade skill, and then you need to have a like written skill. So you're an engineer, but you're also a plumber, because like, hey, maybe you're a lawyer, but nobody's hiring lawyers right now. Well, you can go be a carpenter and you can always find work as a carpenter or, vice versa. And I was like, oh, this is cool. Like this is what my dad talked about, right? Like I can go be here in this field. And so I signed up to join, just general engineering field. And right before I left for boot camp, my recruiter comes to me and he's like, hey, I know you're pretty set on this. This is exciting. You're about to leave for boot camp, but I got this sweet, sweet contract for you. This thing's awesome. You'll love it. You'll still get to travel. You'll still get your skill, blah, 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 blah. But you'll be an electrician on communications. And I was like, but, like I'll see like combat and I'll, travel and have a world experience. He's like, oh, guarantee it, dude. You'll travel all over. Like this guy, he didn't know what he was doing. He's just selling me. He's a salesman. He's a typical
Yeah.
recruiter. He's a salesman, right? And he sold me on. And one of the big things he's like, hey, I know you need like money for school. This job comes with a $10,000 bonus. And in 19, I was like, 10 G's? Sign me up, man. Like that's savings money right there. That's like down payment on a car type money. Hell yeah, let's do it. So I signed up as a 2800 field and joined the Marine Corps. And that pushed my boot camp date back a little bit. I was originally supposed to go to boot camp in June of 2012, and I wound up going in August of 2012. And then I spent the next, and then went to boot camp then. Um, After boot camp, MCT, and then went up at 29 Palms. I was in 20 Palms from December of 2012 to August of 2013. I got pretty lucky. I started school right away. And I was like, the whole time I was asking people in the Marine Corps, I was like, how do I get out and travel and see the world? And what they told me was they're like, hey, as a 28, like the 2800 series in the Marine Corps, you're not going to travel, dude. Like you're going to sit behind a desk and you're going to do all these like comm specific things, like you're going to be typing away on GCSS and Oracle systems, and you're going to go to like an El Maco, a maintenance company, and you're just going to be a slave to the system. And I was like, what?
Oh my
I
gosh.
was shocked, dude. Because I was 20 and I had gotten married. I knocked up my girlfriend at the time, so we had a shotgun wedding. And I was like, oh my God, dude, like this isn't what I signed up for at all. Like if you talk like June of 2012, when I changed my contract to like June of 2013, where I am now married, expecting a baby, headed to the East Coast where I was going to a headquarters unit. Like, dude, I was shocked. Like the amount that my life had changed in that 1 year. I was stunned. I couldn't handle it. I was like, no, this is too much. Having like a full breakdown. And luckily enough, my like class, like the staff and CO that escorts your class around and everything like that, like helps the guide the class. He was like, "Yo, calm down." His name is Staff Sergeant Chandler, and he was like, "It's gonna be okay. You're gonna be a dad. You're gonna like, it's gonna be okay. You're gonna go to the East Coast. You're gonna survive. Like your world is not what you expected, and that happens. Like a year ago, you were in a very different boat. That's not how things are now. It's gonna be okay. Like you can handle this." So I went to the East Coast, and I wound up at the Second Marine Division headquarters. In the actual headquarters battalion of Second Marine Division. I wound up at comm company there, communications company, and checked in the first day and was like, "Hey, when's our next deployment?" And the first sergeant there just laughed at me. He's like, "Bro, you're not deploying here." I was like, fuck. What I mean? I was just furious. I was like, no, please, I want to go somewhere. He's like, not for you, kid. That's not the life for you. And he was an old salty like infantryman, and he was like, yeah, that's not gonna happen. So then I spent the next like year and a half there, and I did everything I could to get promoted because I noticed that while I was at headquarters battalion, the people that did get to deploy got sent TAD, or they got to leave and go to another like battalion that was going on a deployment. So that was the coolest thing. I was like, oh, if I get promoted to corporal, then maybe I'll get to deploy. and maybe I'll get to travel like I really want. You know what I mean? And like also, I now have a baby, right? So like I need every dime I can get, right? Like I'm not gonna say I was probably not a good I know I wasn't a good husband, and I was definitely probably not a good dad during that first time. But like it was always in the back of my mind, like I need to make more money so I can help support my daughter and I can help support like my household, because I was 21 years old with like rent and like diaper bills, and like that's daunting, right? Like you got kids, like you know how like expensive like formula and diapers are. Dude, 21 years old on a Lance Corporal salary, I couldn't afford that shit, dude. Like hell
Yeah.
no. Yeah, and I was just determined to get out of comm company, so I did everything I could to go everywhere I could, right? So every time someone was like, "Oh, we need you to go over to this unit for like 2 weeks," I was like, "Send me, send me." Every like they always say like don't volunteer for things in the Marine Corps. I volunteered for everything, like everything. Um, so I went everywhere. I think I probably spent more time out of the unit than in the unit. I went to the field with 1-9. I spent quite a bit of time there. I came over to CEB like as TAD. Um, I came over. I went to just the Second Marine Regiment headquarters. I went to 2-8. I went to Second Tanks. Like I just go everywhere, man. I was like, I need to go as many places as I can, as often as I can. Send me right now. And they were all for it. They thought it was awesome. So that's when I got my Humvee license. Um, that's when I did a lot of cool things. I got to go on ship and I got to go to Fleet Week, up in New York City. So I had a lot of fun that like year and a half I was in comm company, because I was so determined to go everywhere, and they were more than willing to send me. And then while I was a TAD over at CEB, the lieutenant, the OI, like the comm officer there, Lieutenant Siska at the time, uh, he had worked at comm company with me, and he was like, "Oh, hey, like you like working here at CEB?" Because I was there for like 3 months, TAD, and I was like, "Yeah, I love it. Don't want to go back to my own unit. Like, don't send me back to comm company." I'd always been that like dejected kid who'd come in, spent like a month at a unit, like landed on my feet pretty well, and then they were like, "Oh, sorry, like bye bye, like see you, never." And I'd always gone back to comm company as this dejected child, returning to the shitty place that I worked again. So he talked to me a little bit. He's like, "Yeah, you like working here at CB?" I was like, "Yeah, I love it. Like, don't send me back." And me and one other guy had gotten sent over. And Siska made a couple phone calls. I don't know who, like, what kind of drug deal he made, but a week later, I had orders to stay at Second CEB. And I was like, "Oh, how'd you do this?" And he was like, "Don't ask." And I had to go back to comm company and do my checkout procedure from there, and they were furious because whatever drug deal this officer had pulled, it was not the normal channel of doing things. You know what I mean? But like he snagged me away and kept me, and I was like, they were pissed. They were like, "Damn it, Dave, we were counting on you." They'd made me the training NCO because I got meritoriously promoted to corporal at that time, and they were like, "We were counting on you to do all this training. We were counting on you to do these things, and like we were counting on you. How'd this happen?" I was like, "I don't know, man. Like corporal don't know, like just kind of like shrugged my shoulders, like I don't know how this happened, but it did." And they were like, "Fine, whatever," like they were pissed, but they had to deal with it, because obviously it hadn't been my doing. Like the back channels this guy had gone through had not been something I could control.
Hmm.
Um, so that's how I wound up at CEB, was like a drug deal, while I was TAD over there. Like and then I stayed, and I spent the next 2.5, almost 3 years there. And that was another thing. One of the things I'd always wanted to do is I really wanted to deploy and see the world, because I'd grown up. My dad was retired from the Navy. My mom had served in the Coast Guard, and that was something I wanted to see. I all over my parents' house, my dad loves photography, and he's got all these photos from the 70s and 80s and even the early 90s of like Southeast Asia. He spent years and years in the Navy in Southeast Asia. So Korea, Vietnam, like he was in Vietnam in the 80s, and he's like, "Oh, this is what Vietnam looks like." Click. and Hawaii and Australia and just these unbelievable stories. And I grew up with my dad's friends who were retired from the Navy and Marine Corps. So I grew up with all these old salty dogs talking about, oh, back in my Corps. And I wanted that same experience. And when I got to CEB and discovered that as a 2841, the only time you deploy is when a battalion sized element deploys. Not just like a company, not just Alpha Company, whoever, but at CEB you need a whole battalion to deploy, or like a company plus, right? Like two companies. Unless that happens, as a 28, you don't go anywhere. So I was equally distraught because I'd just been traded in a drug deal. I'd burned a lot of bridges unintentionally, not of my own volition, and now I was at a place where there were no deployments scheduled. It wasn't happening. I wasn't going to Japan. I wasn't going anywhere, and I was a little upset. So I took that opportunity to go do every single thing. I was like, well, I'm in the Marine Corps. I want to do every single thing possible I can to get everything I can out of the Marine Corps, right? Like the Marine Corps is going to take their like pound of fat from me. I'm going to take my pound of fat from the Marine Corps. So I volunteered for everything. And they told me no 95% of the time, right? I was like, hey, I want to go do this. I want to go do McQuist. And they were like, no, go fuck yourself. I want to go do this. No, go F yourself. Like every time, over and over and over again, they told me no and no and no. And eventually, when I got promoted to sergeant, I just signed myself up for things. And then they'd come back to me like a week later and be like, we're not sending you to flight like jump school. Get the fuck out of here. You're not going to jump school. Be like, no, look, I signed up like I have permissions on, like this website. I could do this. And they're like, no, we're not sending you to jump school. Do your damn GCSS work, right? It was disheartening, but I think that was part of you said I was a pretty good general Marine. And I prided myself on that a lot. That was where I was at. And I was doing everything I could to just learn as many things I could. And I was still a corporal at the time. We were at the range one day when I was a corporal, and there was a bunch of MARSOC dudes there who were going through their like range shooting, like their annual package, their annual shooting package. And they had to do the stupid Marine Corps range because it's required for everybody. And I saw those dudes, they were in their tricolor camis. All of them had beards, right? Like they were like gearing up for deployment. And I was like, I want to do that.
Sorry, just real quick,
Go ahead.
could you explain just for the audience, what is MARSOC? Why is that different from a regular Marine?
What's that?
Hmm.
Okay, cool. I don't need to do anything. Okay, MARSOC. So MARSOC is short for Marine Corps Special Operations Command, and it is a tryout procedure just like you would find with Navy SEALs, Green Berets. It's actually very closely modeled after the Green Berets. That is like the thing for them, um, and it's what they replicate as much as they can. So in order to just be and go over to MARSOC, you have to be at least a corporal. You have to have served, I think it's at least 2 years. You have to be at least 21 years old. Um, and there's a number of other like medical requirements they test of you. They test your color vision. They test all kinds of things. And in order to go do this, you've got to go do all these tests. You get a sphincter test. You get all of it, right? It's like going to MEPS all over again in military entrance and processing, but it's way more severe, because you are doing what's known as a naval special warfare physical. So they check everything, and
Mm.
they really want to make sure that you are physically capable of handling all that. And then you show up on your first day when only if you pass all that, with your color vision and all that. Once you've passed all that, okay, cool. We like you. You can come on board, and you show up the first day. It's you and 200 other Marines who are all hoping to get a little more out of the Marine Corps. And that's ultimately what I wanted. I was like, hey, I'm in the Marine Corps. I'm not getting enough. I want more. And I definitely did not belong there. I'll just put it that way.
Why is that? Why did you feel that way?
Uh, because I've always felt like I'm lazy. I know you talk. I'm like I'm kind of motivated. I don't know. I've always felt like I'm kind of a lazy slug. And the dudes that were there were hard, tough people. And I didn't feel like I was that tough. I didn't. I don't know, I always felt like kind of a puss. right? And the guys I was there with, I was like, oh, these are titans of men. Like
Hmm.
these are the hardest dudes I've ever met in my life. And they're not even like mean hard. They're kind of jovial, you know, like I showed the first day I was on a first name basis with all of those guys from day one, right? And like, you know, oh, you're not Captain blah blah blah, you're not Sergeant blah blah blah, you're like Mark and you're Dennis. You know,
Hmm.
and that's just how it was. Like that's how people were. And that was cool. I really liked there was a lot of very cool things there that I think the Marine Corps could learn from. Um, and the military as a whole. Like it was casual, it was very task oriented. You show up, you do this task, you do this, you're done for the day. Your task might be climb a fucking mountain, but like that's your only task for the day. Finish the task, you know, however you need to do it. And I did get hurt there. Um, Between my back and my foot, I was mega broken by the time I wasn't selected, which is totally fine. I didn't belong there. You know, like I was a med drop and I got no problems with being that med drop. You know, like I was disheartened at the time. It was depressing, but I also knew that there was more for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because I
How could you walk
yeah,
me through? I guess from the day you got there, how long and like what kinds of things did you do? Like what was everybody else doing? I know that I've seen MARSOC people and they got their little like colored ropes or whatever and the different color ropes. Like, could you walk through like what is a typical MARSOC Marine train or rather MARSOC, I guess candidate, right? Are you technically a candidate? What are you?
yeah, you're called a candidate
Mhm.
for those first like 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So you are showing up. So you show up and it's physical assessment after physical assessment, right? They're doing, you don't do like the standard PFT like the Marine Corps does. You just do a run and then pull ups because they don't care about crunches. You do a modification of the CFT that's a little bit harder. You're doing a swim qual that's pretty intense, right? Like, and then you're showing up, you're doing your qualification, and then you're doing whatever physical exercises they've got for you. So maybe, and you're carrying certain items with you. So you've got a rubber rifle, and you carry that rifle with you everywhere for like 6 weeks straight. And you've got a like a rope. You carry that rope with. Once you get given a rope, like your fifth day, sixth day there, you carry that rope with you everywhere. You get given a like an old school Alice pack, and you got to like hopefully you've already learned how to pack a pack properly, but you're carrying that pack with you everywhere you go. Like you, okay, and we're gonna go on the run to the pool. So as a group, as whatever your team is, you run all 70 of you, whatever, you run to the pool. Get in the pool, swim a mile in camis, get out, run back. Okay, the next day you've got like this land navigation you've got to do. Cool, where you're navigating 12 miles, 15 miles, 20 miles, whatever. And I didn't finish all the training, so I don't know, and I can't talk about like the final
Hmm.
sections of it. Would be a disservice for me to even do that. Um, but the thing that really messed with me, I've had back problems for most of my life. I had meningitis as a kid, and it's always messed with my back ever since I had that. And then I had foot problems while I was there. The Marine Corps boots suck for my big old fat feet, man. I've got like a duck foot, and the Marine Corps boots just they ain't it for my feet. So between like a broken toe and a major herniation on my L5, like I was bone, dude. I couldn't walk, I couldn't sit, you know, and that was probably the biggest thing. I couldn't sit down for extended periods of time because I hurt my back, and that was how I eventually wound up. That was eventually what dropped me because I couldn't walk, and then I couldn't sit down with like any kind of weight on my shoulders. So
What kind of like if you were to describe your experience through the eyes of these manly men that you discuss, right? How
yeah,
do you think they perceived you? Like what kind of relationship did you have with them? And did were they like, man, it sucks to see you go because you're a med drop? Or yeah, can you talk about that?
yeah. So the guys I was there with, really, really cool. You see a lot of people drop in like the first week.
Hmm.
I want to say probably 50 people out of the 200 that showed up were gone in the first week. And it was just kind of surprising. It was like, oh, like this isn't that hard. And it wasn't like I've been through harder things, like than the initial training. Um, you are being assessed the whole way by the instructors. They're always watching, but it's a lot about making friends. Like one of the things that I think most of the special forces community does is they just try and like be bros. They're just buddies. They're not being dicks to each other. They're just like, oh yeah, I'm, Kyle. Nice to meet you, man. Oh, I don't need to know that you're a war hero or this anything else like blah blah blah. You're just Kyle. And that was something that group was very interested in. Um, Taking photos of my all the guys I was there with took photos of my foot, and the corpsmen that were there took photos of my foot because my foot was wrecked. My right foot especially was destroyed because I'd broken my pinky toe, which I didn't discover until later on. But like I had massive blisters on my feet that were just wrecked, man, and they were made it hard to walk. So like I know the other dudes I was there with took pictures of my foot, and when I was gone, they were surprised. It seems they were like, "Oh wow, like you're leaving?" I was like, "Yeah, I can't handle this anymore." And they seemed surprised. I'll just say that much.
Mm.
I know I definitely wasn't the only one to leave. I was definitely not the only person who got hurt. I was invited back to try out again in the next class, and I spent. I've spent my entire life not recovering from it, um, but just kind of going through some physical therapy, taking care of my body as I got older ever since. So maybe I would have made it and passed. Maybe I don't know. I just don't think I would have been particularly good at it. Like I've met these men that a lot of them were, guys that have been in the Marine Corps 4 or 5 years, same as me at that point in time, and tough dudes that were determined to work hard and just be bros. And the general census I got from nearly everyone there was that they wanted more from the Marine Corps.
Mm.
Hey, I've done this so far in the Marine Corps. I want more. I want to go to jump school. I want to, search boats. A lot of them wanted to see combat, and they'd been infantrymen or whatever job, and they hadn't seen combat. Well, especially if you're a job that signs up to see combat in the military, and then you just spend 4 years, going to the range every couple months and not getting to see that. A lot of those guys wanted to see that. They wanted that hard adventure and the brotherhood. And I'll probably say of the dudes I met there, I don't know, they seemed more chill. So they seemed like cool dudes who were just determined to work hard. So there was a lot less yelling than you get in the typical Marine Corps. I'll say that much.
Right, yeah, which is a
Mhm.
lot. Yeah, for
Yeah.
those unaware. So, a couple questions. Why did they take
Good.
pictures of your foot? What was the significance of that? Is it
Because
so
they were
fucked up?
yeah, because it was so fucked up.
Okay.
So when you show up like the first week, one of the like they give all kinds of briefings, right? So you'll run, do some exercise, and then they'll make you take like a litmus test of some type, or they'll make you do whatever. And one of the briefings you get is on medical drops, and they were like, okay, here's a history of medical drops that we've seen. Here's blah blah blah
Oh,
blah. This is a
no.
PowerPoint, right? And there's 200 you and 199 of your closest friends all sit in this room like watching this like medical drops, right? Like, oh, this candidate fell and broke his leg. This candidate fell and broke his back. This candidate, like a lot of like fall. This candidate had a puncture in his leg from this and was dropped, right? And that's always the statement, right? They're like, oh, this candidate fell, broke his leg, and was dropped. And that was one of the things the corpsmen actually, when I was getting dropped, they were like, "Can we take a picture of your foot? Like, we're gonna put it in the PowerPoint." I was like, "Yeah, sure, man. Yeah, like, yeah, I guess, So my right foot is, it's
It's
not like
floating around right now. Just some RSOC candidates are like, ah, damn it, this guy
right.
broke
It's
his
not
foot.
like it's not a toe tag on there, with like, oh yeah, this is Stephen Day. This serial number. Like, it's just like, oh yeah, this is a foot. And then that's always the statement, like, oh, here's this candidate. He didn't take care of his feet well enough. He broke his foot. Now he's dropped. And that was kind of the statement over and over and over and over again.
Yeah. All
So
right. Fair enough.
yeah,
So then, I guess my second curiosity about everything you just said, you mentioned multiple times. So one, you said in the very beginning of this sort of when you're talking about your life and Marine Corps interest, that one of the things you wanted to do was perhaps see combat, and then you're talking about these MARSOC candidates doing the same thing. They wanted more. They wanted to see combat. What do you think that is from like a human perspective? Why would somebody quote want to see combat?
Media, if we really want to get specific. And then I think it's kind of seen as like the ultimate test. And this is kind of, my dad had seen combat, and I think it's one of the things that's seen as like the ultimate test of who you are as a man, right? Like I grew up just reading and loving military history books, and not like your traditional like Harvard level history book about World War II, but I loved reading like Lone Survivor. Dude, I read Lone Survivor like 4 months after it came out as a middle schooler, and I was reading about all these people,
Wait,
and
question: is Lone Survivor that Navy SEAL?
yes, yeah, Marcus Luttrell.
Oh, dude,
And
I heard him on the Joe Rogan podcast talk about that story.
right, so there was obviously the Mark Wahlberg movie, which came out in like 2013, 2014, whatever range. But years before that, there was a book. He wrote a book on that whole thing with a professional writer, like literally as he was in hospital bed recovering in the United States. There was a writer there working with him the whole time to write a book about it.
Oh,
And I read that book as a middle schooler, you know. And another big one was 93 Confirmed Kills. It's the autobiography of a guy named Carlos Hathcock, who was a Marine Corps sniper in Vietnam, and he's considered like the godfather of Marine Corps sniping. So between those types of things and then just movies over the years, like I was 8 years old when 9/11 happened, and my dad was obviously retired from the military. He had all kinds of friends that were in the Marine Corps, and these dudes were pissed that everything that had happened in 9/11 happened. They're like, how dare you do that to the United States? And as a kid, like growing up and absorbing that, I was like, how fucking dare you do that to my country, you know? So, and especially, I mean, I'm certain you've seen it in the environment of the Marine Corps, like joining in 2012 when I did, almost every one of my friends went to Afghanistan.
hmm.
Almost every single one of them. And besides a little time on ship, I didn't go anywhere, So like both my roommates while I was in 29 Palms went to Afghanistan. One of them literally he went down the street to 1-7 after communication school, and they got him ready, and he left for Afghanistan 3 months later. Like, so he like graduated from the schoolhouse, was in Afghanistan by the end of the year. And that's how all my friends were. All of them. Every one of them went on deployments to combat, and they were in combat deployments. Even if they weren't necessarily on the front line, they were in a combat environment, in a combat zone. All of them. So for me, having been in the Marine Corps at that point at 4 years and having seen nothing like I wanted to, you know, and having grown up with years and years of history, it was like, oh, am I man enough? It's kind of a question of your man card. Like, are you a man enough to survive these types of things? Or are you a tough enough dude? And I don't know if I am or not. Like I have no idea if I'd survive in combat. And I honestly, now that I'm 30, like I'm older, I don't want to see combat. Like that's a frightening like prospect. Like the possibility that I might die before I get to accomplish everything I want. Like, not that I wouldn't fight if given the need. If someone invaded the United States, like absolutely, I'd be right there to fight for my country because that's something I wholeheartedly believe in, and I am deeply patriotic at the end of the day. But do I want to like voluntarily go overseas? Fuck no, not anymore. Now I'm an older man who's like, oh God, that's terrifying. Like the thought of not being there for my daughter and raising her, like that's terrifying to me now.
Yeah,
But
it isn't. Sorry to interrupt.
oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just say, isn't that a hell of a thing? Fatherhood and then the perception of death. Like, for example, for me, like the other day, I was, I don't, for whatever reason, I was thinking about dying. Obviously, this just happens, when you're human.
Yeah.
But it before it was always like, okay, what is this eternal darkness that I'm plunging myself into? And it was kind of scary and mysterious and whatnot. But now that I'm a father, all I think about is like, oh man, what are my kids gonna do? I'm not gonna be able to, teach my son how to be a man. I'm not gonna be able to be there for my daughter through whatever trials she goes through. Dealing with men or whoever whatever she does. And that's what was running through my mind. I was like, oh, dude, like they're so young right now. They're like not having me. It's like, what do I need to do? Like, how do I set this up in case I do die young or so? And then I'm just like, oh man, and then I had the epiphany. I was like, oh, I don't give a shit about myself. Like that's out the window at this point.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure I do because everybody has a self-preservation thing, but there's a clear difference, like thinking about death before and thinking about death now. Now it's like, how do I pass on the stuff that I need to pass on to my children, and then just being sad about thinking them being sad and like how they react and I don't know, like that was like I think just such a subtle change, but when I think about it, I'm like that's very profound, and I didn't even notice this change. Like I wonder at which point, like was it at birth? Was it like when I got to know their personalities? At some point in time, I just like the levels, it feels on a scale. It just like it's almost non-existent. I didn't even think about myself. I was like, eternal darkness, whatever. That'd be fine if I didn't have kids. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, did you have a sort of moment where you realize, like, oh, this is what I care about now, my daughter?
Yeah, it was probably like late 2016, early 2017 range. And I mean, I love my daughter from the moment she was a baby, don't get me wrong. And I was
Hmm.
very excited when she was born. But the connection, I think, didn't really start to get there until she was a little bit older. Not that, I didn't love her, but she was a baby, and oh, what do? You sit there, you cry, I feed you, you stop crying. Like I didn't feel like that connection was there until she was a toddler. At which point I was like, oh, like you're like a human being and you're my friend, and you love me unconditionally just because I exist. And I love you just unconditionally because you exist. Like there's no rhyme or reason behind it, but I love this ball of meat, that walks around and talks and makes stupid jokes. So how do I make sure that you grow up to be the best possible human you can be? And honestly, if there was like a good life for my daughter, like I knew she'd grow up to be, if I knew 100% knew that she'd grow up to be the best possible human she could be by me sending her off to boarding school, I'd pay for boarding school tomorrow because I love her company, but I want to see her succeed as a human being. I want her to have the best possible life she can, whether that's me involved or me not involved. Like that would be a sacrifice I'd make in a heartbeat if I like knew 100% she was going to have a better life. And I've heard stories of people, in like war zones, like handing off their children to departing soldiers so that way their kids can go live a better life out of the war zone. And I'd do that in a heartbeat for my daughter. I'd be like, go, like you go live a better life, like go have your opportunity to be something, to be the best you can, or to at least have the opportunity to be best you can. That was one of the chief reasons I got out of the Marine Corps because especially towards the end of my like term on active duty before I left and then entered the reserves, I was real caught. I was like, oh man, what do I like? Is she better off without me? And I thought about it for a long time. I was very seriously like considering enlisting, and because her mother and I were separated at that point in time, like, do I enlist and go somewhere else? Would she be better off with just, oh, dad is a picture and a paycheck? And I ultimately decided, like no, she's not going to be better off. She needs me in her life. All the you always hear about like the stories of like, oh, the porn star came from like a broken home, and there's a lot of evidence that shows that the children of divorced parents have a harder time. And I was like, okay, yeah, like her mom and I are not going to stay together. Like that's a definite happening. But how do I make sure that I can give her as many good opportunities as I can, even though she's going to have this major setback? What do I do to make sure that she's just the best possible kid she can, like, and she's got the best life she can possibly have with me involved, and I've gone out of my way to make sure that I am involved in her life. I'm not perfect. There's absolutely times when I don't want to be a dad. And that's probably something no one talks about as a parent. But like, there's definitely times you're like, I do not want to go to your swim meet. I don't want to go to your soccer game. I don't want to go to your like little play. But you do it because you want to see them succeed and you want them to have that memory of you being a good dad and you want to see them, become a productive human. That's huge for me. Like I want my daughter to grow up and to find her place in the world and help contribute to the world as a whole. And I think if more people saw the world like that, like, hey, you don't just have kids to have kids because they're fun. You have kids to help make the world a better place. And that's my goal for my daughter. She's going to grow up. She's going to be a productive member of society, doing whatever it is. She's a YouTuber, right? And like she just makes lots of money doing dancing videos on TikTok. Like she's contributing to the world, and she should turn some of that money around and put it to good use. If she's, a programmer that solves the AI question and allows us all to live a happy and fat life without ever working, like, cool. That's what her position is. Whatever she grows up to be, I just want her push and grow and become productive. You
Yeah,
know,
I hear echoes of your parents, of their
probably.
of their motto for you, and also for anybody scoffing at what you said about how you don't want to go to the swim meets. Sometimes you don't want to be a father, or a parent rather. One, they probably have never had kids if they are scoffing at that, and two, that is an innately like just human thing what you just said, because a child will demand more time, energy, whatever, than anybody could give to it. It's impossible to meet all the satisfaction needs wants of a kid, so you have to do your best. And what you're talking about is you're talking about sacrifice. You're sacrificing because obviously you're going to school, you're trying to make money, and you're supporting her, right, financially through all this. And you're also making time for all this other shit. And I worked and I went to school as well. And that's very, very difficult. And I was not a father at that point. So I can only imagine just your energy just being, sapped and drained by this just busy life that you're doing. And that's, that's what a parent does. They sacrifice because how, you know, how long in human history has particularly the father just always been around and raising the kids? Basically never, right? You go back to even a couple hundred years ago, the men are out there slaving away all day, sacrificing their time, their body, their everything in order to support, their families. And my dad, my parents divorced when I was like 3. And my dad literally, like you're talking about, hey, making the sacrifice of maybe never seeing her either again or not seeing her very much by sending her off so she could have a better life. My dad literally had a piece of paper when my mom moved to the US saying, do you allow your children, because they needed permission from him
Mm-hmm.
legally, to go to the US? And he looked at that paper and he just fucking cried. And he's like, I know what this means. I'm never going to see my kids again, but they're going to have a better life. And this guy's, he was born and raised in the Soviet Union, and he's got a piece of paper sending kids off to America. You know what I mean? Like that's
Yeah.
crazy. It's a crazy thing, but he's like, this place fucking sucks. And he signed that paper, and that's why we're here, because of that sacrifice that he made. And it's not, it's not easy for him to not see his kids again. Well, we've seen him a few times, so it's not that dramatic, but it
Right.
is, because we see him like he's in Russia right now. Like I see him every few years. Like it's not, and last time I saw him was like 10 years ago, and with the escalation and the war and everything like that, because he's in Crimea right now, right? So, that's like the hot spot. Like no one's going there anytime soon.
No.
But it's like a necessary thing, and that kind of stuff has always happened, right? The men is, hey, there's a war. All right, see you later. Women and children stay back, and you know, that's how society goes. And if you think otherwise, you have no idea how fucking privileged you are by thinking, oh, a man and a woman should always be there for the kid. It's like they should always be there for them in spirit and train them and mentor them to model the environment that they're going into so that their software programming in their brain matches the environment that they're going to go into. And for the longest time in human history, that's been through a lot of sacrifice and a lot of pain and a lot of not wanting to do this. So yeah, I commend you for, being super honest about that. Cause dude, my kids right now, they're with their grandma because
Yeah.
me and my wife are losing our fucking minds
Yeah.
because they're running around and we have no time to think. They're destroying everything. And we're like, oh God, please help. We're like crawling around by the end of the day, and doing that every day for years. It is a grind. And yeah, yeah, oh man, being a parent is, yeah, I wish that everybody had that, experience of being able to just always be there, always have all the money, being home for the kids. But that's just not a reality for most people.
No, and that's certainly not my reality. I left active duty in the Marine Corps and wound up working. I was working full time at first, and then I was working and going to college. And there's huge portions of my daughter's life that I'm just not there for. And now that I'm nearly done with school, and I'm not working at the moment, you know, I'm still missing sometimes just because I'm in college and I can't, model my school schedule after her school schedule. So it's a struggle, dude. And I would say, especially as like a single dad, because I split custody with my ex-wife 50-50, but there's a it's not 50-50. My daughter's here a lot of the time. And there's just opportunities that I miss. My friends will there's that's it's hard being a single dad and trying to date. It's really hard being a single dad at like a young age, or like just a parent in general at a young age. You in your 20s and you're 25 and you're like all your friends are going to Vegas and you're like, nah, I got to go to work and then I've got class afterwards because I have to make sure that I can pay the bills. Like I have to keep the water on, or my daughter's not going to be able to take a shower in the evenings. So like I've got to work, and I'm not going to say it's the antithesis of fun, but it's daunting. Being it's daunting trying to get there and do this whole thing and take care of her while also trying to live your life because everyone who only lives their life for their children, they just implode. You need to have your own identity, and then what do you do when your kid gets old and moves away? And your kid's 17, 18, going off to college, joining the military, getting a job, whatever, out of the house, and you don't have an identity. Well, if you don't have an identity after your children leave, what are you? You're a husk, and you
Yeah.
need to have your own identity too. So I know exactly what you mean. Like your daughters, your kids are off with your grandparents. Like it's got to be kind of like a little relaxing to just sleep in a little bit and not have to worry about making them breakfast and changing diapers and things like that.
Yeah, no, for sure. And listen, man,
Yeah.
I think I could talk to you forever about all this stuff. Thank
Okay.
you for your time today. I think this
Oh,
is
dude,
this is a
thank you for having me.
good note to end. Good luck with your college. Good luck with everything. I hope everything goes smooth, and let's do this again sometime.
Absolutely, man. I'd love to. Maybe we'll have some more specific things we'll talk about next time rather than just blabbing like we did the whole time.
Yeah, 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 for sure.
So
All right.